Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Yvonne, and I will be your moderator this evening. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you all Dick Knowles, and I'll let you take it over, Dick.
Thank you, Yvonne. Hello, everybody. I'm glad that you're here with us tonight while I share some information about the process Enneagram. I'll give you a little background first. I got into this while I was working in DuPont, where I worked for 36 years. And I was trying to understand in an organization, why is it when you put a nice group of people together in organizations, things get all balled up? And with that same group of people, when you have a crisis, they instantaneously become a high-performance work system. They do extraordinary work until the crisis is over, and then they go back and we behave badly again. Those questions troubled me deeply, and I struggled with those to try to find a better way to lead. And in the course of that, came across the process Enneagram, or came across the Enneagram, rather, and studied it and studied it. And I've been now using it for 25 years in consulting work with all kinds of organizations, industrial groups, not-for-profits, government organizations, schools, social organizations. What we'll be talking about tonight applies to any group of people who come together to work on a problem that's important to them. Now this slide shows the diagram of the process Enneagram. The word Enneagram is merely a Greek word for 9-term system, and the green circle with the numbers is a 9-term system. As I said earlier, for years I tried to understand what this meant until we discovered, by putting these labels around the 9 terms, that we could make this into a practical tool for working with people to solve important problems. The process that always begins with the people with a question that is very, very important and compelling. Like, how do we improve safety here? Or how do we improve our customer service? And there has to be a burning desire in the group to make improvements in those areas. And then we begin with identity. Who are we? What is our organization? How big is it? Those kind of questions, all in relationship to the initial question. We next look at intention. What is it we're really trying to do? Then we look at the issues and ambiguities, and these are all the things that keep us from reaching our intention right now. Then we look at relationships. Are people trusting and interdependent, or is there no trust and lots of fighting and counterproductive behavior? Next, we look at the principles and standards. These are the principles of behavior and the standards of operation. So you'd also have quality things here as well as behavioral things. And then we look at the work, and the work is the actual physical activity that we would see going on in an organization. Information relates to how do we use information, how do we share it, do people understand it, how do people use it, etc. And then we go on to the point, learning and potential. As we talk together, what have we learned? And we talk about that, and then we begin to talk about new possibilities that are opening up. And last but not least, we talk about context and structure. Both of these are really, how are you organized points? Context is the outside world. How is your outfit organized with respect to the outside world? And structure is how are you organized internally? Is it a top-down command and control? Is it a team-based mixture, whatever? The process Enneagram is a tool that we can use for leading, planning, discovery, understanding, transformation, and co-creating the future. When you use the process Enneagram, you're making a choice for intentional, purposeful change. Now, the process Enneagram is a tool that is used when we're working in complexity. And complexity, in my simple definition, is any time when you have a group of people together to work on a problem, you're in complexity. But this whole area of chaos and complexity sciences began to really develop about 1962 when Ed Lorenz, who was a mathematician working on weather forecasting at MIT, was trying to predict the weather and accidentally discovered the butterfly effect. Other people made great contributions to this science. One of them is Mandelbrot, a mathematician from IBM. And he discovered what he called fractals. And these are the patterns in nature. And a fractal is any pattern that has multiple levels of similarity, like a head of broccoli. If you break it apart, you can see you have two heads of broccoli in your hands. If you break those apart, you see you have two more heads. They get smaller. They're not the same, but they're similar. Organizations began to be seen as chaotic systems. Organizations like Visa International and the Internet, which are actually run from the edge and not from the center. Ideas around complex adaptive systems began to come up, and people like Bruce Waltak and Glenn Oyoung and Steve Costello helped make great contributions in this area. Ralph Stacey began to talk about complex responsive processes. And his view was that the conversations and the responses in organizations were really the basic for everything that was happening. And a new idea is coming along, which I kind of like, complex evolving processes. This is just coming along, as I said, and I think it feels good that organizations are not static, they're evolving. So everything we're talking about here is moving all the time. Now, I said that the process Enneagram is a tool for complexity. And I can illustrate kind of that idea here with this chart. This comes out of some of the work from Ralph Stacey. The vertical axis is the one where we can indicate whether we're close to agreement or far from agreement or somewhere in between. And the horizontal axis is whether we're close to certainty about what we're going to do in the outcome and far from certainty. So if we're running something like a payroll where we have a pretty good agreements about how to run it and have a high level of certainty that everybody will be paid properly, we're down in the lower left-hand corner of this chart. And these are the tools down here that you use of ordinary management. When you get very far from agreement and very far from certainty, you get out into the zone of chaos. And the best you can do there is wing it and hope that you can get together and make some things happen and keep trying. But between the ordinary management and chaos is the arena of complexity. And this is where the process Enneagram is most effectively used. And as I said, whenever we have a group of people who need to come together to talk about something and develop some new ideas, we're in the arena of complexity. Now, the process Enneagram process begins with a question of importance, a compelling question. We need a cross-section of people in the organization to come together because everyone has a perspective about the particular question. The top person has a perspective. Middle managers have perspectives. First-line supervisors have perspectives. Those doing the work on the floor have perspectives. And they're all different, and they all can be additive. Claire, my partner in this work, uses a beach ball metaphor to help illustrate this. Perhaps I'm on the green stripe and she's on the red stripe. On the green stripe and the red stripe, we can see some of the same things. But we also are in a situation where on the green stripe, I see some things she can't see, and she sees some things on the red stripe that I can't see. So it behooves us to talk together so we get as much information as possible and share information, because that's what we need to do to solve our problems. We engage the whole organization in the process. Diversity becomes very important. New ideas and insights emerge. We listen, we question, we seek questions for understanding and learning together. And as we go through the process on the Process Enneagram chart, which is posted, we write down the responses to the various questions going around the circle. New ideas emerge. And in the process, the group creates their living strategic plan. This is a living document which is posted on the wall and they use and talk about as they move forward in their work. A whole is created, a brand new one. People solve complex problems. They see themselves and their relationships in an entirely new way. Excitement and commitment grow as the people are heard. New possibilities and paths open up. And they do not resist the change because they've created the change. I've found that if change is imposed, people will resist it. But if they've helped to create it, then they are not going to resist it, but rather going to work to advance it. The Process Enneagram is a set of nested patterns and processes. The process starts, as I said, with an important question. And then initially with groups, we look at the current state from the 9 perspectives and talk about things, and information emerges. We'll just walk around the perimeter of the Process Enneagram going in a clockwise direction. I'll talk more about that in a moment. As we do all this work with the Process Enneagram, we begin to see the patterns and processes of leadership, of how work gets done, and of personal and group transformation. It releases the energy and the commitment of the people, and they co-create their future together. And it's a cyclical process, so we're on a helix. And each time we go around the circle, we begin to move up the helix, and we can continue to move around in many cycles as we continue to learn and grow. So let's look at the patterns, and the first one to look at is the circle. This implies a wholeness and a completeness. When we are around the circle, we can place the labels that I showed in the first slide. Identity, who are we with respect to the question? What are we trying to do? What are the issues and ambiguities that keep us from reaching the intention? What are the relationships like? What are the principles of behavior and standards of performance that are important for us? What is the actual physical work? How do we create and use shared information? How do we learn and think about the new potential that may be emerging? And what does the outside world look like in the context, and how are we organized inside? When we begin to work with groups, the first cycle we make is this one, and just move around the circle in that order. And that's the way in which things tend to show up in organizations. We can often, in this first cycle, discover huge disconnects between what they say they want to do and their principles and standards of behavior, which would get in their way. For example, I've done some workshops around safety where their current performance is lousy. They have an intention to become world-class, but when they get down to principles and standards, they talk about hiding information, covering up, horseplay, bullying. And after that first cycle is done and all the pieces have been addressed, I'll ask them, are you ever going to get to your intention doing what you're doing? And they all agree they can't, which opens up the door for the next cycle. In the next cycle, we begin to move away from the circle and move into the inner patterns, which are invisible to most people. And it's by moving into the inner patterns that we can begin to solve the complex problems together. There are 2 major patterns here. The red triangle, which is the self-organizing leadership process of sharing information, building relationships of interdependence and trust, and creating identity of the group and helping people see how they all fit together and why each one is important for the success of the whole. The pattern for how work takes place moves from intention to principles and standards, back to issues and ambiguities, across to context and structure, down to work, up to learning and potential, and back to intention. And in that cycle, we begin to move up the helix together. Now, this is the pattern of self-organizing leadership. This is the most important piece of work that leaders can do and need to do. They need to go out among their people and talk together and build some trust and build some interdependence. Need to listen and talk. Need to share information, essentially all the information except for private personnel matters. Let people know what's going on. Let them ask questions and learn. And in the course of that, help everybody to see how they fit together into the whole. This is an interactive, living process that takes place. When I was the manager in West Virginia, the plant there in Bell, I kept track of what I was doing in this area, and for 5 hours a day, for 5 years, I engaged with people who were not direct reports, and we were doing this work around these points. It takes time, but people get it. This is the pattern for work. It's an archetype that is a pattern that applies to all work. Work begins with an intention. We want to do something. There are going to be certain rules of principles and standards about how we do it. We're going to have to address some problems, the issues and ambiguities, and set up the workplace, do the work, and then take some time to think about it and see what new potential comes out. So, for example, if my intention is to nail 2 boards together, there's some principles and standards about nailing, like hold the nail straight, wear your safety glasses, don't pound on your thumb. There are also some issues and ambiguities that need to be addressed, like what kind of a nail should I use? How big? How long? What kind of a head? As you go to the hardware store and you look around, you see that there are many, many, many different kinds of nails. So which ones do you choose? You then have to decide how you're going to set up the work. Are you going to do it in the kitchen counter, on a workbench, in the backyard? You make that decision, and then you actually do the work of hammering the nails and hammering the boards together. And then you take some time to look at your handiwork and say, well, maybe I could have done this different. And the next time I have 2 boards to nail together, I have learned from this experience. And so I've gone this upward helix. All work follows this pattern. When we look at the right-hand side of the process Enneagram, we see a deeper pattern of importance. And this is a pattern of personal transformation, where we create value. When our intention is very important and we really, really want it to succeed and do what we have said, people are often willing to give up some of their bad habits and bad behaviors and begin to work together in a new way, which is much more purposeful. The intention has to be quite strong for people to be willing to do that. But then they can begin to talk about the issues and ambiguities based on this new sets of behaviors. So they can talk together, they can listen together, they can seek the best solutions together because they're listening, they're being respectful, they're helping each other. And for many groups, this is new kinds of behavior for them to engage in. So on the right-hand side, we create value through this personal transformation process. On the left-hand side, we realize value, and the organizational transformation takes place. We decide to do our work in a more self-organizing way, so our structure becomes flatter and less hierarchical. We began to form ad hoc work teams to work on a particular problem, and when that problem is taken care of, the teams move on, reform, and do something new. And they do the work together, and then they take time to look at what they've done and talk about what did we learn, what was new, how can we do this better, where did we get into trouble. And out of that conversation, new potential begins to emerge. So on the right-hand side, we develop new relationships. On the left-hand side, we get new information about how we can work together and see the success in it and learn together. And that frees us up to become even more creative as we go forward. Now, these patterns of self-organizing leadership and the work are mutually supportive. The fundamental pattern is the red triangle: identity, relationship, and information. That supports the pattern of work, from intention to principles and standards, to issues and ambiguities, to context and structure, to the work, learning and potential, and then back to the intention. But the intention now is a new intention, a higher intention. If we look at the side of the process Enneagram, we can see how the process of self-organizing leadership, sharing information, building relationships, creating our identities, supports the work. So as you as a leader are working on sharing information and building trust and interdependence and helping people see how they fit in for a particular job, that moves on for another job and supports another job. So these items in the self-organizing leadership process support the work, whatever the work is that we need to be doing up above. We've been doing this work with the process Enneagram for about 25 years. Claire Knowles, my partner, has helped a lot of organizations solve complex problems and transform themselves. She's worked with not-for-profits, women's organizations. She's done a lot of safety work with me. And she's written a couple of books about her work, one called Lights On, A Reflective Journey in 2012, and her most recent book, Can You See Them Now? The Elephants in Our Midst. I've been doing a lot of organizational transformation work and safety leadership work, and I've written a couple of books, one called The Leadership Dance back in 2002, and recently Partnering for Safety and Business Excellence. All four of these books are Amazon bestsellers. Another group, the Dalmo Group, has been doing organizational transformation and leadership development in Australia and globally. They do very fine work. Steve Zweiback is part of that group, and his focus is at improving public schools in California. Carl Stent in New Zealand is working on safety leadership. And there are other practitioners in the U.S., Canada, China, Japan, Europe, and Malaysia. Gwen Andrews and I worked together on the internet while she helped to lead a transformation in an English language school in Weihai, China. And they moved from being almost broke and very poorly attended to becoming quite profitable and quite well attended as they used the process Enneagram to work through their issues. In Malaysia, I've been working with Mariette Kane Chen on her PhD thesis, looking at leadership of teachers. And during the course of this work together, she wound up having herself elected to the parliament and is now Deputy Minister of Education in Malaysia. And she assures me she's still working on her thesis. Beverly McCarter and Brian White wrote a book, Leadership in Chaotic Organizations. Chaotic is a word invented by Dee Hock, the creator of Visa International. And it's a mixture of chaos and order at the same time in organizations. And I've recently edited a book, The Process Enneagram, Theory and Practice, published by Emergent Publications, where there are a series of 9 essays on the theory and use of the process Enneagram. Beverly McCarter and Brian White, in their book, mentioned that the process Enneagram seems to be the missing link between complexity theory and practical application. We can use the process Enneagram to take all the theory that's being developed and bring it down to the dialogue and the conversations in our organizations that can make the difference. And 12 years ago, Tim Dalmo said, "This is the only known tool that simultaneously helps people solve complex problems, create the social connections, and release the emotional energy and commitment to do their work quickly and well." And as far as I know, that still applies. So why do we use a tool that looks kind of complicated to solve complex problems? Well, it's practical. It moves quickly and effectively. It's robust, proven in hundreds of organizations. It's sustainable, and it always works. When people are willing to sit down and have the conversation, they always find new insights, they learn new things together, and they develop a new path forward to do their work. Now, here's an example of where I was using this kind of an approach when I was the plant manager in Bell, West Virginia for DuPont. And this chart shows the total recordable injury rate from 1983 to 2006. I came into the plant in 1986 when the injury rate was about 5.8. That's about the number of injuries, OSHA recordable injuries per 100 employees per year. And for us in DuPont, that was way out of whack. We drove the rate down using a very strong command and control process, but we could not sustain the work because as soon as we released the pressure, people began to get hurt. And we began to use things like the process Enneagram and talking and listening and working together. We went to teams. And injury rates went way down to 0.3 or 0. And they held at that level for about 17 years. 12 years after I left. So the processes that we built into place were sustainable and the people carried them forward, even though there were, during that period, about 5 different plant managers. But over time, some of the people leading the process deep in the organization began to retire. And management quit talking to people and sharing information and building relationships of trust. And the safety began to unravel. And unfortunately, they had a fatality in 2010. By sharing information, building the relationships, and helping people to see how they fit in, we can accomplish extraordinary things. And this is a graph showing the injury rates at a great big sugar mill in Ayr, Australia, where I worked as a consultant. And the red arrow shows where we did our workshop. And they've been running at very, very high injury rates. 1 or 2 people a year being killed in the mills. And after about a week of work together around the process Enneagram and spending time with the men and women in the mills and with the management, they got the ideas and they got their injury rates down to 0. I don't think they were lying. I think those are real. So they did extraordinary work together. So when people get together, talk openly and honestly with respect and caring and understanding, extraordinary change can happen quite quickly. So I'd like to extend an invitation to all of you. How can we go forward and spread this work? Because there's a huge need for organizations to come together and for the people to talk together, not only to improve safety, which is close to my heart, but in almost all other areas of our work. We can work together. It can be done quickly. You can become accredited and a recognized expert if you want. Process Enneagram is a tool to use in complex systems, helping people to gain clarity, release the energy, make decisions, and move forward, and create their living strategic plan. The Process Enneagram is a living system tool. You begin to really understand it when you begin to use it. Just looking at the slides like we have had tonight helps to open some insights, but it doesn't really develop the understanding until you actually begin to engage with the people using this tool. I came across an interesting Spanish saying. It's a lot easier to talk about the bull than be in the ring. With the process Enneagram, we step into the ring. We engage with the people. We listen. We talk. We explore for the best ways we can do things and develop understanding. So I invite all of you to come together. Perhaps we can find ways in which we can partner to move this work forward. I'd like to thank all of you for participating in this tonight, and be glad to open up for any questions you might have. And I'll turn it back to Yvonne to help us through this part of it. Thank you.
Fantastic, a wonderful presentation. We do have a question that's come in via the web. So the question that came on the webinar was, regarding the pattern of work, why are the arrows pointing only in a discrete pattern? Couldn't the arrows go in many patterns? Where does the pattern start? The intention, I think this would make sense. And that came from Mark McGibbon.
The pattern begins with intention. Going deeper into this, looking at the significance of number from John Bennett's Systematics. He was an English philosopher. The intention is the monad. That's where we begin. And a monad you can visualize as drawing a circle on a blank sheet of paper, and the conversation is what's inside the circle, what's on the edge of the circle, and what's outside the circle. So we have to get clear on our intention. What is it we want to do? Then we begin to apply our values, and they show up as principles and standards. So if our values are that we really want to accomplish this new intention, and I'm willing to begin to be more open, share information, treat each other respectfully, listen. We're willing to have high standards for quality and safety. Then we begin to move back to the dyad, issues and ambiguities. The principles and standards are a triad. Most people get stuck in either or dyads. You resolve those usually by compromise or brute force, and people come out with less than they could. If we bring in a third force, like our principles and standards, and then talk about the issues, we wind up discovering new things that none of us knew about beforehand. And this is where we begin to get emergence, and this is where the personal transformation begins to occur. We then move across the pattern to the context and structure. That's an 8-term system, rather a 6-term system. And we move down to work, and that's all work and defined in 4 terms according to Bennett's work. And then we look at the 5-term system of learning and potential. So there's a very deep reason why these things are in this sequence and how they fit together, which could be the subject of another webinar or further discussions. It's taken a long time to fit together the work of Bennett with this work to try to make a pattern that makes sense. I hope that helps, Mark.
Fantastic. We have a question from Craig. He's asked, what about Dave Snowden's SNIFIN, I hope I pronounced that right, framework is another valuable tool that brings complexity science into a practical application realm?
That's an area that's very important and one I want to learn more about, and I've begun, with the help of Bruce Waltock, to begin to have a conversation with Dave. I don't know enough about that. I think that these things are quite mutually compatible. But I've got to learn more about it, as they have to learn more about what I'm doing, because both of us, I think, are new to each other. But that's an area that's coming up for exploration. And there's going to be a safety conference put together in July in which Dave's processes will be used to talk about safety, and I'm going to be able to go there and participate and see how it works. So it's going to be some learning together. I don't believe these are mutually exclusive at all. I just don't know enough about how they really fit together yet. I look forward to learning that.
Fantastic. Gary from Vancouver has asked the question, when we listen, we often unfortunately do so with cognitive biases. What thoughts do you have about gathering stories, narrative research, as a formal process?
We like using stories, and actually in our workshops we begin with stories, because stories are often a way to find meaning in what we're talking about, a deep meaning, sometimes a meaning that's hard to express directly. So for example, in our safety workshops, where we have the cross-section of the organization and have the hierarchy and the power structure, we can move the power structure to the back by telling stories. I tell a story about a tragedy that happened where I used to work in Niagara Falls. Claire tells another one. Other people in the group begin to tell stories of personal tragedies that happened to themselves or to close friends and relatives. And it's in the storytelling we begin to learn together. And when we create the process Enneagram, it's really the storytelling process to create this. It's a structured dialogue, but it's open, and people talk about what's important and why. So I think, again, storytelling brings some real strength to this process.
All righty. We have another question, and it is that they were wondering if you could give some examples of where you've used this, and do you find that it takes a long time for people to get it?
Good. We've been able to use the process Enneagram, as I said earlier, in any kind of organization. So, for example, I worked with Mayor Elia of Niagara Falls from 2000 to 2004 with her leadership team. And each week, at the beginning, we developed our process Enneagram in about 2 hours. Then each week we talked about how are we doing. And over the course of 4 years, by talking together, doing things more sensibly, they were able to cut $16 million out of a $62 million budget. Some of it was because they began to buy insurance more carefully. But some of it was because of conversations like occurred between the sewer people and the street people in deciding to fix the sewers before they paved the street, rather than after paving the street and tearing it up and then paving it again. I've worked with a group of people in children's services in Canada, and there were lots of interpersonal strife among the workers and the staff people. We were able to sit down and begin to talk about what they were doing, and their intention was to have really good services for the youngsters they were caring for, and they had to begin to develop some new principles and standards of how to work together. That was very successful in how it worked. You saw the safety examples and how they worked. Claire worked with a group of women in a volunteer group that was struggling for membership and purpose. You know, one Saturday morning they worked through the process Enneagram, and over the next year their membership increased 2 or 3-fold, and they began to grow again. So you can use this anywhere where people are coming together and need to talk about important things. One very useful area is in mergers and acquisitions. Often mergers and acquisitions do not result in the kinds of things people visualize when they begin their conversations, because one group or the other tries to take over and you have a lot of cultural strife. If we can sit down together and talk about these things and work them out together as we go forward, it makes a huge difference in the success of a merger and acquisition. Claire and I used it in a home for homeless women in Gloucester, Massachusetts, to help them think through their succession plan for their new directors, who were remarkable people leading this group. So you can use it in all kinds of ways where you have an important problem and you've got to sit down together and work it out. Now the other part of the question I think was around, you know, how long and how quickly do people get it? It depends. Some leaders are quite open to learning, willing to talk with people, willing to participate, really want their organizations to get better. And that moves pretty quickly. I've bumped into some managers who want me to go out and fix the people and they don't want any part of it. that goes very slowly and often does not work very well. The process Enneagram is a living system, and we have to participate and engage in it to make it really, really work and be very, very useful.
Good. Michael from Cognitive Edge says that he doesn't have a question, but he just wanted to share a link in case you wanted to share it about the 2-day seminar that you mentioned in response to Craig's question. So that is cognitive-education/events/6210. And we will share this with everybody in an email after the seminar. And then the final end of it is /creating-and-leading-safety-culture-Washington-DC. So I'm sure that some people are like, oh, lost at the first bit, but we'll be sure to send that out via email tomorrow then. Does that sound good, Dick?
Thank you very much for that. Yes, that'll be good. That's the seminar that I mentioned where I want to go and meet Dave and the others and learn about what they're doing, and hopefully we'll learn together, see how things fit. There's no question that we need to work on safety. 4,600 people a year in the U.S. are dying every year at work. That's almost all of those are preventable. Thank you.
Fantastic. So that takes care of all of the questions. I'm just going to make sure that nothing else has come in and that no one has their hands up. No, that takes care of all of the questions. So I don't know if you wanted to put it back on the final slide so that people can get your email address if they want to get some more information from you. And thank you very much for this very informative seminar. We did have some people on the seminar that were saying thank you and great presentation. So I'm sure that a lot of people got some fantastic value out of this presentation. So thank you so much for bringing it for us.
Yvonne, thank you for your expert help here to make it happen.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, everybody. Hope to see you some more. Give me a call and let's keep talking. Bye-bye.